Welcome to the Inspired to be Authentic podcast, a podcast where we converse with people who are living their most authentic lives. We get real with our guests and talk openly about how they live with courage to be themselves. We explore barriers they have overcome to be more authentic and aligned to themselves and their purpose. I am your host, Matt Lancedo. I'm a transformative life coach, empathic healer, and spiritual teacher. I specialize in teaching people how to heal shame and trauma and embody their authentic self so they can enjoy more meaningful connections in their lives. My areas of expertise are working with highly sensitive people, empaths, and gay men to develop a stronger sense of self-worth. This is episode 34, and we are talking about how to consciously navigate suffering. So in this episode, you are going to learn how to essentially walk the spiritual path with integrity and with understanding and wisdom, that you're divinely exactly where you are meant to be. I'm hoping that that's the message that comes through out of today's episode. So we're going to be meeting Jane Lyon, and we're going to be hearing about her story. And we're going to be unpacking together the topic of the Great Awakening collectively, and also the spiritual awakening for each individual soul, and what this means to each of us. We're going to be unpacking authenticity and how moving towards authenticity requires us to suffer and also to grieve who we are not. So grieving our inauthentic self on the journey towards our authentic self. We're going to be talking about what is suffering, what is its purpose, and how to consciously navigate our way through suffering. And then Jane is going to graciously share the 4 noble truths of Buddhism with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that. So before we meet Jane, I want to just let people know that Inspired to be Authentic podcast and YouTube channel is listener and viewer supported. So if you're enjoying this content, you can support me by heading over to my Patreon page in the show notes to support the show. It helps me continue making inspirational content for you to consume. And let's read a review, because people have been leaving some really beautiful messages on the podcast. So Millie D says, very insightful and gave me lots to think about. Inspired some deep soul searching. The podcast was very honest and open. That's a beautiful review, because that's my goal. That's my mission with this podcast, for it to be loaded with vulnerability and authenticity and openness. So thank you for that review. Very kind. All right. Without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Jane.
Oh my gosh, Matt, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, hanging out with you and connecting with your beautiful audience. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for coming and having the willingness to share with us. And I've been looking very forward to this conversation. You and I had like a meet and greet. I like to do that with my guests now, just to make sure there's resonance. And just something lit up in me when I was sitting across from you, like just from the minute we connected. So I'm like, okay, this is like some really great connection that I want to share with the world. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So a little bit about you. Jane is a yoga teacher, a Buddhist practitioner, and healer in the realms of Reiki and Akashic Records. Jane is a guide for young women on the spiritual path who yearn to remember their divinity and discover their deepest truth. She is here to help others transcend their own suffering and do the work of the Bodhisattva to be of benefit to all sentient beings. We have very similar purposes, as we discovered in our meet and greet. One of our purposes that we share is we want to help people move through suffering. So this was like a very organic topic that I think we both are very passionate about. So why don't we start with your kind of origin story? Like, what got you into this work, and why is helping people move through suffering important to you?
Yes. Well, as I'm sure you and everybody else knows, or hopefully will understand by the end of this episode, there's so much suffering here on this planet. It's kind of part of the deal on Earth. And I was born into a very, very nice, privileged, cushy, wealthy life. And I still suffered so much. And I think that even growing up, I'm here in Salt Lake City in Utah, in a very conservative, right, community, where I always felt kind of like someone was trying to put a lid on me. I was always too much. I was always too out there. I never really fit in quite right. And I spent most of my life doing everything I could to fit in and to, play the game and look like I was doing everything correctly. And that just came to a screeching halt my second year of college. I became so depressed, so unwell. I stopped eating. I really spiraled down very, very quickly. And I checked myself into a treatment center. And, you know, I always look back and I'm so grateful at whatever little voice said, like, go get help. Go get help. Like, you are not meant to live your life this way. It is not supposed to be this bad. But I was so not okay. And I didn't know why. I couldn't really understand what exactly was wrong. I didn't have these lists of things that had happened to me that had caused all of this suffering. But I simply wasn't okay. So, you know, I went into the treatment, the therapy, the groups, all of that. And I started to, you know, learn to take care of myself and get better. But I still felt like, you know, the light wasn't there. Things weren't clicking. I felt like the clinical medical system was keeping me alive and medicating me and, you know, cheering me on. But it was like, I swear there's more to life than this. I swear there's got to be something better than this. And so I just kept looking, and I got really curious about meditation. There was this little voice that was like, learn to meditate. I had practiced yoga my whole life. I was lucky enough to have started at a young age, but I wasn't really taught to practice yoga in a way to take care of yourself. I feel like I was taught yoga in a way to be fit out of a gym. So I like that. I was like, I wasn't getting what I wanted out of that yoga practice. And I kept hearing this voice, learn to meditate, learn to meditate. And this was back in 2012 when there was no content on how to meditate. It's crazy how much there is now, but I was looking everywhere. And so I found some books, and I kind of started my own little 3-minute practice where I would just focus on my breathing. And that little practice started truly like lightening up my body. And everything just started feeling lighter just from these little 3 minutes of practicing. So I just kept following it. And one day I saw an ad in a magazine I was working for that was for an 8-week introduction to Buddhism course. And at this point, I was in such a low place, and I saw that advertisement, and it just was that, like, this is it. This is the medicine. This is what I've been looking for. And so I signed up for the class, and that was the moment that my whole trajectory changed. I started going to that class every week. I had no idea that there is an authentic Buddhist temple in downtown Salt Lake City just waiting for me to walk into. And I went there every single week, and I never stopped. I still go. I ended up becoming a full-fledged member of the organization. I took refuge. I formally converted. I'm now on the board of directors. I'm very involved with the temple itself. And I also ended up meeting the love of my life at this temple. But I'll rewind a little bit, because what happened when I walked into the Buddhist temple is that I was taught this thing called meditating on compassion, on self-love. And we would give all of our love to the whole world, and then we would try to bring it back into ourselves. And it was like, it wasn't working for me. I was like, I'm doing it wrong. I don't feel it coming back inside of myself. And so I just kept doing the work and doing the work. And this whole time that all of this is happening, I am a deeply closeted gay person who you know, maybe you can relate. I'm sure your readers can relate. I truly thought my world would completely fall apart if I came out. And I really think that was a big, big chunk of the suffering. And of course, we've got shame, we've got self-worth, we've got all the other things that like add up onto that. But it was one day in the temple, we were like 2 hours deep into practicing. And I just had this moment where it was as if my body turned and sat in front of me and grabbed my own shoulders and said, like, you need to come out. You need to tell the world who you are. You're going to be okay, but you've got to stop lying to yourself. And that moment, I really wanted to run out of that place and just run from everything and just keep avoiding. But it would have been very rude for me to have left. So I had to stay there and sit with those feelings. And it was like, wow, this is so scary. This is so intense. But I actually had a boyfriend at the time. I went over to my boyfriend that night and I said, I can't do this anymore.
Mm.
I have to tell you what's really been going on in my mind. And I started, telling people and coming out. And it was literally after that, everything just started unraveling in my life.
Yeah.
Everything did fall apart exactly as I thought it would, but in the most beautiful way, because for the first time in my life, I realized the only person I have is me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't honor myself and trust in myself to get myself through this, then who do I have?
Yeah.
So I look back on that time and I'm always so proud of that person who just said, it feels like you're losing everything, but you took refuge in the Buddha and you took refuge in yourself, and you're going to get through this. And here I am today. I ended up meeting the most beautiful woman in the world at the Buddhist temple. We live together now. I run this amazing yoga and healing business. I'm supporting so many young women, queer women, so many people on the path to just exactly what you're doing, Matt, which is why I think we connect so much. It's just like these people that come to work with me, they have grown up in a society that wants to put them in a box that says, this is how you act, this is how you be, and they're not happy.
Yeah.
And they don't know why they're not happy. And I say,
Mm-hmm.
we got to get you out of that box, babe. We got to get you stepping into who you truly are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of, in a quick nutshell, kind of the story that got me to where I am today. I'm fully recovered from anorexia, very, very healthy, off all of the medication I used to be on, better than I ever could have dreamed of being in this life. And it only goes up from here. So
yeah. Wow, you took us on a journey. I was like tracking you emotionally, and it was heavy. There was some stuff you've navigated, and I got this this imagery of like your world crumbling, but it crumbling into place.
Exactly.
Right? Like just honoring yourself and what it is that you need in this life. And I think one of the greatest sufferings that we can endure as human beings is perpetual toxic shame, and being scared to be our true selves and hiding, and just the damage that does to ourselves, and what we're telling ourselves, our soul, that it's not okay to express the divinity of who we are. We have to somehow mask it, and it creates this kind of I guess this dissonance between inauthenticity and authenticity. And it's like my whole journey has been that, exactly your story of unlearning the masks that I used to build around who I actually was, unlearning those masks and grieving them, right? Because that's who the world saw me as, that's who the world was reflecting back to me that I was. And I had to grieve the loss of that before I could step into the truth of who I was. And it's not an easy transformation. It's but it is the transformation. It is the transformation in life, in my opinion. And this is why I'm so passionate about suffering, because I think like you, I've endured a lot of suffering in my life, and I think it's through my suffering that I've acquired depth, I've acquired character, integrity, worthiness. So all the things have come out of suffering. And I think suffering is our greatest teacher, I think.
Yes.
And but it's a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the ass, but
yes.
So that's what we're here to unpack with you guys today. So I want to just thank you for sharing your story so vulnerably, Jane, because I think it sets a nice tone for what we're going to be diving into. So okay, so where do we want to go first? Do we want to unpack the Great Awakening, the collective, or do we want to talk about more the individual?
Oh, wow. I think, something that I think is so interesting about what you just said is that so many of the work that I do is, supporting the awakenings in the people that feel a resonance with me. Of course, that is all connected to the greater scale of what's happening now. And I love what you said about how we have to grieve the person that we were. And the person that we were was the person that kept us safe in a society that maybe we weren't safe to be ourselves in. If I had come out when I was in first grade and I was aware of it, things would have been pretty bad for me,
Exactly.
So I've been having a lot of messages lately from people who are on the path and people I'm working with, and they're saying, I've come so far and I feel so much grief lately. I feel like I'm losing who I was, and it's so hard. And am I supposed to grieve so much? Am I supposed to grieve the person that I was? And I feel like this is a message that's wanting to be shared today, is that absolutely you are going to grieve the person that you were. It's going to feel like a loss when you let go of the old patterns, the old coping mechanisms, the old identities that kept you safe at once. And we have to hug those younger versions of ourselves, love them, nurture them, and say, thank you so much for protecting me and taking care of me when I needed you. And now I'm ready to let you go and let my soul's authenticity really, really show through. And I think that's such a big part of the journey. And when you get there, you might think you're backsliding or that it's getting harder, but that's just another part of the step to get through. And something else that I'm hearing a lot is that you kind of touched on is, Jane, I've suffered so much in my life. How could I ever help somebody else? And what I wish that, these amazing souls could see is that suffering, that darkness, I see it as this rich, fertile soil that you get to grow from. Do I want my leader and teacher to be someone who has just skated through life and never had a hard time? I don't even know if that person exists, right? Or do I want to be inspired by someone who has seen the darkest of days, the most difficult of times, is holding more shame than we could ever know about, but they're working through it and they're releasing it. That's what's so beautiful. And so just kind of hearing what you said, I kind of wanted to touch on those things. And I guess we should get into the awakening of the person, of the individual, because what's so interesting is that I love serving, like my ideal client is a young woman who's, most of them have just graduated college and they have absolutely no idea where they're going. And this time, like, early 20s, late teens is when you're starting to have these more critical thoughts. You're starting to see that your parents weren't perfect. You're starting to question the authority that raised you. You're starting to think on your own. And this, in my opinion, is when a lot of us start to have that spiritual awakening. And that's why I want to be so visible to the people that are in that place, so that they, I was desperate for somebody to guide me, desperate. I was looking everywhere for just someone to teach me something. And it took me about 2 years until I found that place at the Buddhist temple that could give me that home. And so, I guess I'm thinking about when in our lives does this begin? For some people, they go through a dark night of the soul. They go through their lowest of lows and they hit that rock bottom and they have to start getting out of it. And for others, you get into your early 20s and you start thinking differently, and you start opening up your mind, your heart to new things, and the transformation just starts happening.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. I think I'll start with my interpretation of what I think is happening right now on the planet, because I think this is this will play into I think setting the stage for where we want to go. But we've been living in an age that has a paradigm around groupthink, around conformity, and I think that's where a lot of focus has been put into to fit in. If I don't fit in, I internalize shame and I'm somehow an outcast. Now, in the Aquarian age, we are moving towards authenticity, towards free thinking, towards people being liberated from things like toxic shame and their trauma. And I think this is the ultimate transformation that a lot of people are going through. I think it's manifesting in the expression of the masculine and the feminine. And I believe that that is not necessarily about gender specifically. It's about more so about energy. I think every human being on this planet possesses a masculine energy and a feminine energy, and the masculine energy tends to be more action oriented, more do, more mental, whereas the feminine tends to be more nurturing and, empathy oriented, compassion oriented, and more beingness in the body. And this is how we have this yin and yang of who we are. And for the last couple thousand years, we've been in very much a masculine dominant energy, which has been, really oppressive towards the feminine. And what's happening right now is the feminine is waking up. The planet herself is feminine energy, and this is this healing is happening on this planet, and we're moving through this massive what I categorize as a collective shadow work period, where we're healing the wounded masculine and the feminine is rising up. And not saying the feminine is going to surpass the masculine for people who are worried about that, or that's going to cause them some anxiety. It's creating a restoration of balance where they can be in harmony together. So in my practice, in my coaching practice, I'm seeing a lot of men who are moving through a lot of shame as their feminine becomes activated, and they're learning how to become more sensitive, how to become more empathic, and these sorts of things. And I think we're actually going through a collective awakening, and I think it's happening in cohorts though. And the reason why I wanted to share this is because I think that the people who follow my work are gravitated towards me because of for a very divine reason, because they see something in me, and they are moving towards their own awakening, and they're moving through their shadow work and whatnot. And I really want to highlight that the people who are light workers, who are empaths, who are sensitives, and have been doing this work, a lot of us have suffered a great deal, and our suffering has been the instrument that has awakened us. And I do see that right around the corner, people who have been doing this work for so long, we're now settling out of this massive amount of upheaval, and we're now settling so we can find stability and empowerment, so the next cohort can start to awaken, and then we will be there to support them and move them forward. So whether you are somebody who's been doing this work for a long time and you're ready to hold the space for people who are coming in, or you're coming in, like you're just starting your awakening and you're just starting your spiritual path now, and suffering will be a part of your journey. This is the motivation behind me wanting to do this podcast and wanting to continue to work with people who are suffering, because I do know that there is going to be a massive amount of awakening on this planet, and with awakening comes a great deal of suffering. So I want to provide as much awareness around that the suffering is essential and necessary. We don't need to reject it. But what can we do to start to bring the suffering in and work with it, as opposed to numbing, distracting, dissociating, doing all the things that we do as human beings to distract ourselves from the suffering? How can we move towards the suffering and allow it to transform us and awaken us as it's intended? So I feel complete. And then now I want to hand it over to you. What are your thoughts
I
about
love that question. Yes. Oh my gosh. And you're speaking to a woman who ran from her suffering like crazy. And I was such an empath as a young kid. And, part of my journey was picking up books on empath and HSPs and realizing, oh, this is why I felt so much. I don't have this list of traumatic things that happened to me, but it was like feeling so much all of the time was so hard, and feeling for everybody and feeling everybody's energy all of the time. And that was something I had to learn to master. Now, when it comes to suffering in general, I think that the first thing is that when we're suffering, a lot of us think there's something wrong with me. I'm suffering. I am a victim of this world. We wrap the shame up into it. I shouldn't be suffering because that girl over there is happy and those people over there seem happy, and why aren't I happy? And we're thinking that our suffering is different than others, but we're all just really, really good at hiding our suffering and not showing it. And it takes such vulnerability to notice in the moment And this is a practice I have with myself. I find myself lying on the floor crying, and I just stop. Oh, I'm suffering. I'm suffering. And as my teacher would say, you're so lucky that you're feeling and that your heart is beating and that the tears are flowing, because it's such a blessing to be alive and to feel and to have experiences. There are so many people who are completely numb, who don't have empathy, who don't have those feelings and are running from them. So
Exactly.
if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I am suffering, congratulations. You have joined Team Earth. You have joined the human race. We are suffering. And I think that for me, and this is why I love the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism so much, once we can recognize that you are definitely going to suffer, whether you are listening to this right now and you have a headache, or you hurt your back yesterday and something is tweaked, or you're driving from point A to point B and you're so hungry you feel like you're going to die. Like suffering can be on so many levels, right? It can be painful in our heart, it can be our health, it can be in our relationships. Every single day you're going to suffer in some little way. Like all day today I've had the sniffles. That's my little sprinkling of suffering, and I'm okay with that. I'll take it. That's all I need for today. But if we can accept that first noble truth is that we're going to suffer here on this earth. It's part of the game. It's part of the agreement that we've made. So when you find yourself in those moments of suffering, I find that people add the shame and the embarrassment and the victimhood to their suffering.
Exactly.
And they dig themselves a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And so if we can remember that the universe isn't pointing its finger at you. It's not saying you're bad and I'm going to cause you to suffer. It's not saying you're a bad person and I'm going to cause you to suffer. It's just saying this is just the way the world works. There's causes and effects, and there's reasons that you are suffering right now. And if we can just accept that in the moment, we can lighten our load a little bit. And we can just, something I love about having my partner as a Buddhist is that we've had days where we're fighting all day and things are such a mess and things feel so awful and we're screaming at each other and we don't know why we're mad. And then one of us starts to giggle. And then I'm like, why are you giggling? And then she keeps laughing. And I'm like, why are you laughing? And then I start laughing and she's like, we're suffering. Like we're suffering so much. This is hilarious. Why are we creating all of this? And what I love about Buddhism is that we laugh at the suffering and we try to bring light to it and say, wow, here we are doing that human thing that we do called suffering. And that all just lightens the load. Don't be so shocked when the suffering happens, and it won't be so heavy. So without getting into a full elongated lecture, I'll stop myself there.
Yeah, I just wrote down so many things when you were talking. It all came through. So there's one thing that I want to, or one word that I want to introduce to the audience, and you've probably heard it before because I use it all the time, is allowance. The word allowance. So allowing the suffering to take place, because as human beings, we're very programmed to move towards things that create pleasure and move away from things that create pain, right? It just makes sense, right? Nobody wants to move towards pain, but that judgment alone of pain and pleasure and creating that polarity between the two, I think it creates this favorability towards wanting to move towards pleasure. So when we have this inconsistency show up in our lives where we're like, shit, well, my pleasure is being interrupted by pain. Well, what am I going to do? We bring in resistance and we push it away, and we're like, I don't want to feel that. Get it away from me. And what that does is it does the opposite of allowing. It creates judgment, and it tells us that there's something wrong with us, like you said, and that what I'm experiencing is undesirable, therefore I don't want it to be here. So what we're doing is we're telling the suffering that it's not okay for it to be there, the pain, it's not okay for it to be here, and it doesn't get acknowledged. And usually inside of our suffering is whether it's a wounded inner child, it's trauma, it's unhealed shame, it's something that needs our attention, right? So you can think of suffering as like a toddler, a 3-year-old toddler, kind of tugging at your shirt, like, look at me, give me attention. And we just continue to only look at the thing that's creating pleasure, and we're not tending to the suffering. And within all of our suffering, there's treasure. And it's like the map to pointing us in the direction of our own liberty and our own liberation and freedom. And I just think that without that map, it's really, really hard to set yourself free, right? So I've really learned how to work with it. So for an example, something that really really interrupts my functioning is jealousy. Like if I'm in a relationship and my partner is, attracted to somebody else or whatever, it really in the past has just completely thrown me for a loop. And I always would blame, I would get angry, I would do all the things, right? But I would never actually inquire and go within and be like, what's going on here? Or bring my jealousy into the connection and say, listen, I'm feeling jealous. Can we talk about it? Instead, I played it out in these unconscious ways. And what that does is, like you said, in your relationship, it creates more suffering. If you meet suffering with suffering, you're going to create more suffering. So I just think that allowing myself to admit and say, yes, I feel jealousy in my relationship, and I'm going to practice humility, and I'm going to bring that to my partner and say, I'm feeling jealous. And then guess what happens? It dispels, it releases, you're giving it permission through allowance, you're giving it permission to release. So I do think that allowance for me, when I use it, it settles me into the notion that when we have a feeling, or even a thought for that matter, that causes us suffering, a lot of the times we're releasing, we're purging when we allow it. Okay. But the programming tells us we're reliving and we're staying stuck in a cycle, but we're not. I truly believe that when we allow ourselves to feel, we're actually releasing and we're letting go. So that was a really big reframe for me in my suffering, because I was like, every time I have a really nasty dark thought or a dark feeling come up, there's a part of me, my inner consciousness, my higher self knows that I can smile because another layer lifted out, making more room inside of me for all that I want to become and all that I am. So I just think that reframe for me was what helped set me free, because then I'm like, when suffering does enter, I no longer need to push it away. I can bring it in because I know that it's going to create another peeling out of a layer that's going to help me get closer to the truth of who I am.
I love that so much. And just what the word you use, allow, like that is one of my favorite mantras. Allow, 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 allow. And I love how you brought in, kind of your own shit, your own stuff that, you get stuck with. And it makes me reflect on kind of the way that, so when the suffering arises, or the trigger, or the uncomfortable feelings, we all have our automatic responses, right? Like mine is usually to just go away. Like I just dip, I'll just bail. I don't want to stay there in that feeling. I will get in my car and I will drive up the mountains until I feel like I'm far away from it. And so what I have had to do, and this beautiful lesson the pandemic has taught me, is, okay, I'm feeling this. For me, it's usually anger. Okay, I'm feeling this anger again. How do I usually respond? Well, I usually get in my car and drive away as far as I can. Okay, I'm going to try anything but that. Literally, try anything else. Okay, I'm going to stay with it. Maybe I want to yell. Maybe I want to get in bed and journal. Maybe I want to talk it out with someone. But I'm going to try doing it differently than I always do. And that way, instead of, every time I am angry and I run away from it, I'm literally letting it just build up in my system, right? I'm meeting more suffering with more suffering because I'm running away from that little Jane that just wants to be listened to. And I'm like, nope, see ya, I'm bailing. Okay, I'm going to stay with her. I'm going to listen to her. And I'm going to ask, how does this energy need to be moved through me? Do I need to physically move it out? Do I need to journal about how angry I am? Do I need to call my best friend and just like really vent and like talk it out with somebody? What do I need to do to move through this energy so that then, just like you said, we can learn something from it? And this is where that allowance piece comes in. And my practice, for the last year, especially in this kind of new paradigm we're living in, has been, okay, what am I learning from this? What part of me needs to be heard and seen right now? Because something that we do so often is we We blame someone else, just like you said. We need someone else to fix it for us. We're too ashamed to feel it, so we run away. And if we can just be brave enough to just, wow, I'm really angry right now. I'm suffering so much in this moment. What does like the little person inside of me need? If I were my own mother, how would I come and take care of myself in this moment? And those, for me, like, those have been the biggest lessons of depth within myself, learning to go deeper with myself, learning to parent myself, and also just learning that like my uncomfortable emotions aren't that scary. And that if we can look them straight on, I do a lot of work healing anxiety. We can look directly at the anxiety, like really look directly at it. It kind of starts to dissolve. Yeah. Because it's rooted in emptiness. It isn't material. It isn't real. It's just a little energy in your body. Yeah. So allow, like next time you feel that suffering, allow. I love that.
Yeah. It's so counterintuitive too, because like, it's like, we're not taught that, you know what I mean? We're not taught that anywhere in our development, unless we do explore this stuff, right? Like Buddhism, Hinduism, anything that's rooted in these kind of detachment models of being with self. Like, how can I develop my witness consciousness so I know that I am not my suffering, I am not my joy, I'm not any of these things, I'm the consciousness that's able to witness myself in these states of being. That's the work, right? That's the spiritual work. And I think we're all moving towards that. I want to speak specifically to the people who are following my work that are trying to recover from trauma, because this has been my experience lately. I've done a ton of work on healing my own attachment trauma, and it was holding me back. It was messing with my relationships. It was just really, really deep rooted trauma. And I finally got to the root of it. I finally was able to move it. And this is after like 15 years of doing this work. And finally, just this year, I was able to let it go. And I want to share some really important things from my journey that I think people need to know. And my trauma response was dissociation. So I learned very quickly from a young age that I felt very intensely. I was highly empathic and highly sensitive, and my emotions were just way too intense for me, and the emotions of the people around me were way too intense for me. So I learned very quickly to dissociate. I learned very quickly to make everybody else's emotions more important than my own, and that was part of my dissociation. And I became very identified, because for people that don't know what dissociation is, it's essentially when you kind of cut the cord between your head and your heart, your mind and your body, and you just stay up here. You ruminate, you overthink, you solve. It's like almost like you're intellectualizing your emotions. You think about your emotions, but you don't actually allow yourself to feel them in an embodied way. And this was my biggest downfall, because the healing has to be like, you have to feel your emotions in order to heal. And I just kept thinking and spiritually bypassing and emotionally avoiding. And I was like, why am I just in this hamster wheel? Why are my relationships not improving? Why? I was stuck. And for me, it was the discernment between the stories I was telling myself about my suffering, which is where I was stuck in, and the felt sense of my suffering, which I had no idea how to access, because my default subconsciously and consciously was dissociation. So if I'm not feeling, I'm not healing. And that's where I was stuck. So my journey back home to myself, which was written in my book, I basically biographied my whole journey in the book, Be the Space. And I talked about how present moment awareness changed my life, because it was through present moment awareness that I met my body. I befriended my body, and I learned how to come back home to my temple so I could connect to that felt sense, so that I could therefore then heal. So if you are somebody that's stuck on the trauma healing journey and you're not progressing, likely that is why, because you're not embodied, you're not connecting to the body. So my advice to people that are in this position is to find practices that help you connect back into the temple, into the body. Things like yin yoga, really, yoga nidra actually was probably one of the most powerful yogas for me. I had really intense experiences, two of them in yoga nidra classes, where I just fully let go and like hardcore cried in the middle of a yoga class. And it was just like the opening of something big for me. And then that was where everything started to come back into myself. So but one of the things that I did notice on my journey of suffering was that my mind was the biggest thing that was getting in the way of me befriending my body. So I had to learn how to master my own attention, because my attention wouldn't allow me to go down into the body, because my mind would just make noise and be like, no, that's not safe. Don't go down there. Come back up here. So I had to learn how to master my mind. And one of the ways, which I wrote about in my book, is one-pointed concentration. That was a game changer for me. I did that for a couple of years every day. I made it up to like 25 minutes of one-pointed concentration at one point. And essentially, this is just where you're taking your attention and you're focusing on one thing. And when your mind wanders, you bring it back to that one thing. So you're developing the muscle of attention. Yes. and learning how to manipulate and use your attention. Because what I learned is that the mind does not still itself. You can't still your mind. You can just draw your attention away from your mind and into other places. And then that gives you the sense of having a still mind, but really your mind is just a wheel. It's always spinning. So once I learned how to master my mind, I was able to therefore access my body. And that's when the deepest healing started to take place for me. So yes. I wanted to share that story.
Oh my gosh. I love that. And, that is exactly why, in Buddhism, we call that the medicine, because first we want to train the mind. And what we call single pointed meditation is shamatha. It's calm abiding. And that's what I've been teaching for years and years. I have a course on it if you want to go get deeper into it. Because to me, it's so funny that I'm still teaching this, but the easiest way to put this into practice, I like to light a candle, just like right in front of my gaze, and just observe the flame of the candle, breathing in, breathing out, observing the flame, breathing in, breathing out, observing the flame. The mind wanders off. That's okay. We're going to bring it back. We're watching the flame. And we're just going to do that for 3 minutes a day. Yeah. And that is how we start becoming aware of the mind, because that's when we start to realize, wow, my mind is running the show. Yes. And my body is just responding to all of the stuff that my mind is just running at all day. And that's why it's scary in here, because my mind is running the show. I'm not letting my body run the show. Yeah. And so once we can start doing that, we can become so much more aware of how loud it is and how obnoxious the mind is and the types of thoughts that we're having. And a note that I took while I was listening to you is that you dropped a lot of the stories that your mind was telling you. And I think that was, for me, one of the biggest moments of my healing. I had been meditating for so long, doing my yoga, doing my energy work, doing all of this. And then I was met with this experience where I was around all of these people who had hurt me in my past, all the people I grew up with, all the parents who didn't think I was okay. And I was telling myself, that person did that to me, and that person did that to me, and that person thinks this of me, and then it means this about me. And I realized, oh my gosh, my body started panicking because I was telling myself so many stories about what that person did and what it means about me and what happened then and that. And then my body was feeling all of that pain. And so in that moment, in this experience, I got to be with all these people. I just went, okay, I'm forgiving all of you, and I am releasing all of these stories. I'm letting go of all of these stories because none of them are real. They're all fabricated. Yes, the pain that I felt was real, definitely, but I'm going to let go of all these stories. And every time I met someone or told myself a story of, you're not worthy enough, or you're a victim of this, that person did this to you, I stop and I go, oh, there's another story your mind is making up that may or may not be true, but it doesn't matter. So we want to drop the stories, and then the mind can be clear, and then the body can start to lighten up. And then everything just starts to feel better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Do you feel complete on your?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. For now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I relate so much to what you're saying, because my experience has taught me that the body is the refuge from the madness of the mind, the stories of the
Mhm.
mind. And I think, that's the ego, right? The ego structure is created for just that. And I think for um, people who have experienced trauma, in my opinion, they have something called premature ego formation, which is I have
Mm.
to develop my separate sense of inauthentic self to protect myself. And
Mhm.
as a child, and that can show up in different ways, codependency and these different things where we have to literally make other people more important, or we have to develop masks or things in order to keep ourselves safe. And as gay people, we have to do that from a very young age, because we know we're gay and there's something different about us. So we have to start creating this ego that can convince the
Mhm.
world that we're not what they think we are, right? Because
Mm.
we have to
Yeah.
we have to preserve safety. So um I kind of have this whole notion of something called the emotional onion. And when we do, when we're very over identified with the mind, what ends up happening is when we intellectualize our feelings, they don't actually release. They stay
Yeah.
trapped inside of us. And that they form what I call the emotional onion. So it's just, our onions are just layers and layers of unprocessed emotions, which is what trauma is essentially. And when we go on this healing journey, it's really important to connect into the body, because that's where everything is stored. The shame, the trauma, the grief, the sadness, the anger, it's all stored in our body. So when we do start to connect inward to the body, we start to meet these layers. And that's why I say, like, releasing versus reliving. It's, when we allow and we release, another layer of our onion gets peeled back, and our onion starts to shrink and shrink and shrink. And that, for me, is the healing journey, the shrinking
Mhm.
of the onion. And then
Mhm.
when the onion is gone, we're just left with stillness. We're left with
Mm.
our essence, the essence of who
Mhm.
we are, right? Because when
Mhm.
we have more capacity in our body to be with it and not be scared of it, we are able to access the present moment a hell of a lot easier. And
Mhm.
we can connect to our essential self, and without all the stories constantly taking over. So this is where I'm at now in my journey, and I'm still dancing between rumination and embodiment, because I think
Mm.
that's the human condition. I don't think we'll ever be able to fully liberate from it. But I do find that I have such a strong ability to hover above it all now,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
just kind of witness it and be like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, okay, well, and this is why I'm doing this. So I just think our consciousness kind of levels up.
Mhm.
I'm curious
Mm.
though, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think you can fully liberate yourself from the we'll call it
Mm.
ego, like, for lack of a better term? Like, do you think we can fully
Yeah.
liberate ourselves from that?
Interesting. Well, if we call it the ego, then I would probably say no,
Yeah.
because the ego is what's going to keep me from, stepping over a cliff. It's going to be like, oh, or like, or from eating something that's poisonous. It's going to be like,
Yeah.
no, 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 let's stay alive. Don't eat that. But I love this onion idea. And in Buddhism, we call it, we say that everybody has the diamond, the
Mm,
precious, spotless gem that is our Buddha nature, that is the essence of our soul inside of us. We all
mhm,
have it.
mhm,
But when we are born, you're born a woman, you're born a girl, you're born a boy,
mhm,
immediately, like the bow they put on your head, what color it is,
mhm,
they're putting a layer of mud or a layer of the onion over that diamond, covering it up. Don't be gay, be a good girl, get good grades, be a good dancer, be a performer.
yeah,
Layers, 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 layers,
exactly.
until we get to this point where we are suffering so much, we feel so far away from our soul and our truest self. And this is why I think, we can, I thought it was interesting that you had that comment today about like HSPs on the spiritual journey, because it's so spiritual to be a highly sensitive person, because you're
Mhm.
so in touch with your soul
Mhm.
in a way that not everybody else has gotten to, because the mud is so thick
Mhm.
that we're letting our mind run the show,
Yeah.
and the soul is pretty much not really doing anything. So we're doing this work, and in the Vedic scripts, they'll say like, we're cleansing the mirror. And so until we can see ourselves in the mirror clearly, because the mirror is so dusty from growing up in society.
Yeah.
And so I believe that if we continue to practice this process of healing, releasing the layers, clearing the mud, getting to that truest essence of our soul, I think we can get as far as we can, but I really don't believe that I'm going to get to a point in my life where I'm just like, I did all the work and my soul is perfect now and I'll never suffer or ruminate or be triggered again. Like,
Yeah.
I just think that if that's our goal, you're going to be really, really disappointed.
I think that's the origin of suffering itself. That is the
Yeah.
ego trap of suffering. I will eventually arrive to a destination where there is no suffering. That
Mhm.
is suffering in itself, because we are always being taught lessons, healing, karma, whatever it might be, to help us evolve. And it's when we stop viewing suffering as this negative thing that suffering
Mhm.
dissipates. But suffering itself
Mhm.
doesn't actually go away, because what we can frame it as inconveniences or things that are causing pain instead of pleasure. It's just the way we change our relationship to it. And I think
Mhm.
that's what ends up happening. So I always say that, you know, it's not about the destination in this work. You're not going to arrive to some place, because as soon as you think you've arrived to some place, you're now viewing the world through a different lens, and that lens is going to
Mhm.
see something else, that you know, a new perception of reality, which
Mm.
in that reality it might have more things that creates more suffering for you. Right?
Yes.
So it's just like,
Ah.
yeah,
And
it's a rabbit
especially,
hole.
yeah, and I think about, you know, the people who are empaths or who are highly sensitive. For me, for so long, I was really good at numbing everything. And even though I was highly sensitive, my sisters and my friends would be like, oh, Jane's such an ice queen, she never cries. We'd be watching a sad movie, everyone's crying and I'm fine, because I had really layered it on so that I wouldn't feel anything.
Mm.
And so I wonder if there's people listening who know that they're sensitive people. And once you start doing the work, you get to this point where you walk into a restaurant or something and you feel everybody's emotions. You feel all of the energy at once and you're so sensitive to it. And you're like, I need to get out of here. This is terrible. What's happening? And I've gotten phone calls from people who have this experience and they're like, I think I'm doing it wrong because I'm feeling way too much. I'm feeling everybody's stuff. And it's just like, no, your heart has been cracked open.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to me. I got my heart cracked open and I finally started to feel. I started to feel. And then I would, you know, see a stray dog on the street and I would start crying immediately because I felt that suffering so deeply. I couldn't turn away from it anymore. And so, what actually I find that happens is that the more we open our hearts, the more empathic we become.
Yeah.
And what we don't want to do is fall into that spiral of empathic overload,
Yeah.
where we can never really get our head above water because we're feeling so much.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the sovereignty really comes in, of taking care of yourself, putting yourself first, making sure that you're okay,
Yeah.
and understanding that suffering is going to happen and that we can't let ourselves fall into these spirals. And eventually we become more energetically attuned and we can walk into a restaurant and we can feel the things, but we're not going to let it take us down.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a little bit stronger. So for some reason, it felt important for me to bring that up in reflection to what you said.
Yeah, I felt that. You know, the more awake I become, the more spiritual. I think I've had probably sometimes some people crack open and they have like one spiritual awakening. For me, it's been like 7. I've had 7 mini ones, and it's just been like so much suffering after another and another. It's like, you know, and I think the more awakenings that I have, the more sensitive I become. And the more, but then also with each awakening, my emotional onion is shrinking. and it gives me more capacity to tolerate my sensitivities. Right.
Yes.
And because I do think that also, like, the mind eats off of the emotional onion. If you're not doing the work, the mind eats off the emotional onion, because the emotional onion is just a bunch of energy, and it has to be discharged some way. So the mind ruminates and it plays out all the stories as a way to discharge the energy, but it's not actually releasing it. It's not letting it go. It's just discharging the accumulation of the energy inside of us. That's my belief.
Yeah.
And with each spiritual awakening, it's been a deep suffering where I let go of a bunch of layers, and then my mind is eating off of it less. So with, let's say, if I walk into a room and I'm feeling all this energy, I'm able to now discern what's mine, what's theirs. I'm able to kind of tolerate it. I have a tolerance to suffering, which is another thing of learning how to suffer is you develop a tolerance to discomfort, and you push your edge back further. So with each awakening I had, my tolerance for discomfort pushed back more and more and more. And now it's like, it's pretty hard to throw me off course. Like, it's really hard to get me into suffering now. Like,
Yes.
because I don't have attachments to pleasure the way that I used to. I'm able to kind of just move between pain and pleasure and be like, yeah, okay, I'm the observer of this experience, and not so much the person that's experiencing it. But I would say that all depends on the day too. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I love that though, because I think about that all the time. You know, the things that used to just completely throw me off, ruin my whole day, you know, totally bring me down.
Yeah.
It's just so, you know, today it doesn't mean that I don't have these negative experiences. It doesn't mean that my life is perfect. And like I mentioned, I help a lot of people healing their anxiety, but I'm not saying that I've never experienced anxiety anymore, that I'm totally free from it. But the interesting thing is that when I do feel that energy of anxiety, for example, I'm like, oh, hello, interesting. And I'll say to I'm feeling anxious today. This is, wow, I wonder why. And then I'll is there a reason? I don't think there's a reason. I think I'm just feeling this today. And, you know, whatever this meaning is will come to me. And when normally I'd be like, I'm anxious. I'm so anxious. I'm going to go get in bed. I'm going to cancel my day. I can't handle anything. I'm not going to eat. Like, I would give all of these reasons. And then I would also be like, I'm anxious because something terrible must be happening. Like, something horrible is going to happen. I would just go into this doomsday. And now it's just, I love how you said that you just kind of have this like tolerance where it's like, oh, interesting. I'm feeling a little anxious today. This is, wow. Okay. I'm going to move through my day and see what this is here to teach me. And that's when you really become sovereign as an empath, that you're not victimized by anything. No one's trying to harm you or do anything to you. You know that you are in complete control of how you respond to what's going on. And also that mind-body connection isn't so distorted. That the mind, instead of going, oh, something's really bad, something's really wrong, the mind can go, oh, we're noticing, we're aware, we're allowing. Okay. And then things just get easier.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about how I developed tolerance, because I think for a lot of people, like I talk a lot about embodiment, and I think for some people it's just a big jump. Like, how can I get there? So I want to share a few mindset tips that I think might help people, and these are things that I think have helped me tremendously. And one of them is asking yourself, what is this suffering here to teach me? Because I think suffering in the victim mindset is, why is this happening to me? And when we reframe it to, what is this trying to teach me? We're able to kind of discern the gifts in our tests. We're able to look at it and say, okay, what value is here for me? Because the universe is never doing things to punish us. Okay, it's always doing things to evolve us. So we can look at it through the lens of, how am I being evolved through this? So that's the first mindset tip. The second one is I look at my energy as kind of like currency, like a money. So every day when I wake up, I get $100, and I get to choose what I do with that $100. And, you know, for example, if I'm driving and somebody cuts me off and I freak out and I totally lose my cool, I have to give them $50, and then I've only got $50 for the rest of the day. Right. I always think about, how am I going to spend my energy today? Right. Am I going to I have hair in my mouth. Am I going to choose to give my money away to people that are pissing me off, or am I going to choose to keep my money and invest it in, put it in the bank, and you know, build up me? So those are little mindset shifts that we can start to use to not leak out our energy onto things that are going to pull us into more suffering, unnecessary suffering that we don't need to. But I still will stand by the fact that we need to move towards suffering, and we need to be with it in a very conscious way.
Yes. Oh, wow. I love that you just said that, because one of my clients yesterday, we're kind of learning about, you know, for her lesson right now is really just coming into her own empowerment and realizing that she's in control of her own life. And that anytime someone asks her to do something, she has the opportunity to say yes or no. You know, you don't have to please everybody. And so I was asking her how it was going, and she said, you know, I'm learning to budget my energy with people.
Oh, cool.
And I said, budget? I've never, tell me more about that. And she said, well, you know, when my boss comes and asks me to do the thing I know she's going to ask me to do, I can either give her some of my budget and say I'll do the thing I don't want to do, or I can save and say, nope, I'm not going to do that for you today. And I was just like, this is amazing. And then I'm hearing you say this I'm like, this is so cool, because that's exactly, you know, I was the queen of getting up and giving all my monies, all my energetic currency to everybody around me. And then at the end of the day, I felt so empty and I didn't know why. And it was such a long lesson for me to learn that every interaction I have, someone cuts me off in the car, or someone isn't nice to me when they're giving me a service, or whatever happens, I always have a choice of how I want to respond to that. And I'm just obsessed with this new idea of like an energetic bank account that I either get to save or I get to blow it all one day if I'm really upset.
Yeah. And sometimes blowing it all in one day will give you a nice purge and it'll let something go. So
right, exactly. Yeah, you know, I have days where, and I think that, you know, I wonder if you feel this way, Matt. I have days where I feel my suffering is so strong, and I think to myself, Jane, you should be further along than this. You should be more healed than this. Like, you should not let this happen. And when I get really hard on myself those days, I just say, okay, Jane, today you're going to suffer. Just let it be. And those days, I swear, like 2 hours later, I'm like, okay, let's go do something. I feel better now. You know, once we can just let it go, and I will literally say, okay, Jane, take the day, get mad, cry, binge on Netflix, order delivery, you know, get a pizza. And then I kind of like do the thing, and I'm like, oh, it's not that bad. I think I'm okay now.
Yeah. Oh, I relate to that so much. And I wrote a quote on my Instagram, maybe like whatever, a month ago. And it said, sometimes the best thing you can do on a shitty day is allow yourself to have a shitty day. And I put so much pressure on myself. I'm a recovering perfectionist that still slips into that old stuff. And it's like, I tell myself the story of, oh, I'm you know, a spiritual teacher, I'm a healer, I'm these things. So that means I have to have it all figured out. But I've learned very, very quickly that I am a wounded healer, and that's my gift. My gift is my wounds. My gift is my vulnerability, and I've endured a lot of suffering in my life because it's given me depth to be able to hold space for people. So I do think that I've had to learn how to master suffering. That's been one of my karmas in this life. And maybe in my last life, I escaped all my suffering. And in this life, I have to face it all or something, but it's been quite intense. So I fully relate to what you shared. Yeah.
You know, I'm a big believer that we are on this planet to learn how to transcend our suffering. And I think that is a big part of the spiritual path. If I could be so bold as to say that is the spiritual path, we realize I'm suffering. I don't want to suffer anymore. How can I find my way out of it? And that is essentially, in a nutshell, the Four Noble Truths, if you're ready to get into that.
I would say that's our last bullet here, because I love how we're in such a beautiful flow. We covered everything without even having to like ask the questions. So beautiful. So yeah, why don't you give us a bit of a spiel on the Four Noble Truths, and we'll go from there.
Yes. So I'm not a Buddhism teacher. I'm not a lama, so that's not what I do. But I get asked all the time, tell me about Buddhism. I want to learn some of the teachings. And that's such a vast question that I never know where. I'm like, where would you like me to begin with that question? But the first thing that the Buddha taught after he reached enlightenment was the Four Noble Truths. And they're very simple, and we have covered them, but I will just, bring them to a close for anyone who's curious. The first noble truth is that there is suffering. Here on this earth, we're going to suffer. There will always be wars. There will always be famine. There will always be pain. And that's part of being on earth. There will always be suffering. And so we shouldn't be so surprised when it happens. We shouldn't be so taken aback.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the first noble truth. The second noble truth is that, and again, you've touched on this, suffering, it always has a cause. And it's not the universe pointing its finger at you. It's just in your karma. There is a cause. There's something that caused the suffering to happen to you, whether it's lifetimes of your karma, whether it's because you know exactly what you did to cause the suffering, or maybe there isn't a cause that you're aware of, but there's a lesson in it. And that's the cause, is the lesson, the cause and the effect. So that's the second noble truth. And then we have the third noble truth, that there is a way to transcend your suffering. There is a way. You are not stuck in this hell realm for your whole life. There is a way to transcend it. And so in my teachings, I would say, you get to find that. You get to figure that out. Because the fourth noble truth is the path, the Dharma. Of course, the Buddha would say, the things I'm about to teach you are the way. And what I would say is your spiritual path to finding your own way to transcend that suffering, whatever that means to you. It does not have to be Buddhism. It does not have to be yoga. It is your path, your Dharma. That is your way of transcending. And so it's very simple, but when we can contemplate these Four Noble Truths and really spend time every day, there is suffering. Suffering has a cause. There is a way to transcend my suffering, and I'm on that path right now.
Yeah.
I'm figuring it out right now. And I will, like Matt said, like he's teaching us to, I will gain that tolerance for the suffering, and I will spread that light with others. And if I could add like a fifth tip to that, it's when you figure it out, start sharing it with other people.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think you've mastered it, even if you're still figuring it out, start sharing it with others, because people need that medicine. I don't care how perfect you are. I don't care what credentials you have.
Exactly.
Share it with others.
Yeah. Don't wait till you're healed to talk and share yourself. It's never, you're never going to feel good enough. It's this, that's the human conditioning. So yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to offer you a bit of some airtime to talk a bit about what you're doing, because you are transcending suffering for people and guiding people on this journey. So I know you have a virtual yoga studio called Sunrise. Is that right?
Yes, that's
why
correct.
don't you share a little bit about what's going on in that space?
Yeah, so Sunrise is a product of the pandemic. All of my yoga students decided that we would meet on Zoom twice a week to stay connected, to stay in our practices. And that very quickly bloomed into this beautiful memberships page where every class that's live is recorded and posted to this memberships page. I post my meditations. My whole meditation course is actually on there. You can buy it separately, or you can just become a member. All my meditations, my yin classes, my mini classes, my shorter classes. It's pretty much Jane as your yoga and meditation teacher on demand. And then we have our live classes Tuesday and Thursdays at 7:45 a.m. if you're into coming to the live classes. So that's definitely one of my favorite places to hang out and share my teachings.
Beautiful. And you're also doing some one-on-one mentoring, and you're doing some group work as well. So you have the sanctuary.
Yes.
And this is being launched for the first time next week. Is that right?
Yes. So Sanctuary is my one-on-one mentoring program that I've only done one-on-one at a time. And that is actually where we learn to heal your nervous system and get you into full alignment through chakra work, actually. So we learn meditation, energy healing, and we get really, really deep into how to use the chakras to come into alignment build the life of your dreams, let go of all of your suffering, all of that good stuff. And so next Friday, I'll be announcing that I'm going to hold it as a group offering. It'll be my second group offering. And I'm really excited because there's something, one-on-one is great. And then there's something so special about being in a group and sharing that growing and that healing experience together. So if you're feeling like you want to come and do that work with me, I'm always open to men and women. I do have men in my Sunrise group and we love them. And so even though I just serve women mostly, we're always loving to have men come and join us to change up the vibe, change up the energy. So if you feel called to come, master your meditation, learn about energy healing, and really learn about chakras in an actual integral embodied way, rather than just kind of learning what they are, we really get into it and we really come into alignment with them, then get in touch with me because that's going to be happening next month. Yeah.
Beautiful. Lots of good things going on for you. And if you want to get in touch with Jane, go to Jane Lyon, JaneLyon.me, and you will be able to find everything that she is doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to thank you for dedicating an hour and almost an hour and 15 minutes of your time to come and share your wisdom with myself and with the audience. Is so much gratitude for that, because I know a lot of people are going to benefit from this podcast. I can already feel it. It was a real beautiful flow that we had, and I just feel like everything came through and we were meant to share everything we did. So just thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you.
And as always, I want to thank the audience for tuning in to another episode. 34 episodes. We're getting there. There's lots of great content to come as well. So please, if you enjoyed this and you're on YouTube, you can subscribe, hit the bell icon. You'll get notified when I release new content each week, and drop a comment for Jane or I, because I will make sure that Jane, if you guys have any questions, that they can be asked on the YouTube channel, and I'll forward them to her. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast network, Spotify, Apple, anything like that, please give us or give me a 5-star rating and a review, because I'm now reading reviews because they're really beautiful and I want to share that energy with the rest of the world. And a lot of the content I shared today, and a lot of my teachings around this stuff around suffering is in my book, Be the Space. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can grab that on Amazon. So it's in a Kindle or it's in paperback copy as well. So any closing comments from you, Jane?
Oh, I would just love to hear from anyone who is listening and wants to reach out and just say hello. You can find me on Instagram. Jane of 801 is kind of where I'm just super available. I would love to hear from anyone that feels any inspiration from this show today. And Matt, thank you for being an angel on this planet. I hope we get to hang out in real life someday. I feel like I just want to be in the silence with you and just be that, because you're so amazing. And I'm so grateful that you're here on this earth doing this work with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I felt that today, just very comfortable being around you, and it's just an easy energy. So I really appreciate that. And I would love to connect in person one day when it comes into alignment.
Yes. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Have a beautiful day, everybody.
Bye-bye.